Until I was 24 years old, I had never seen the ocean. When I first came to a coastal city to start uni, this was a fact that people found downright weird. This is Australia. Almost the entire population lives on the coast. It's just there, the beach, the massive, blue behemoth of the Pacific. It has always been right there. It would always be. This was an undeniable thing, and the idea that someone had never seen it, they could barely wrap their heads around that. In fact, some people even accused me of lying. I was an accuser too. Visitors to this incredibly isolated town I grew up in, all the way out in the outback, they would tell me about the beach, about how you could look out to the horizon, and even if you had the most expensive pair of binoculars money could buy, you wouldn't ever be able to see the end of it. When I was younger, I simply didn't think this was true, or at all possible. Even as I aged and learned about geography, watched movies and looked at pictures, I never really understood it. Not until my third day in Perth, Western Australia, when I stood on a perfect white sand beach and stared across the Indian Ocean, and I saw, well, nothing. I saw nothing. I'm telling you this because it taught me something that can be utterly mundane to a person, to many people even, at the same time, be miraculous, mysterious, even downright unbelievable. Normal is relative, and some people don't believe what they don't know. One of these instances is why I'm writing this now. It started with a casual conversation between me and a couple of mates. Asher, the first friend I had made when I moved to the city, had pointed out a big black text to scribble. It ran down the inside of my forearm. "Why have you always got shit drawn on you? Are you thinking about getting a tattoo, are you?" he asked me, cracking open the first of what would have become many beers on that particular afternoon. "It's just an old habit," I said. "We used to have to do it back home because we had a grey skin. I guess I'm just used to doing it now." You had a what now?" Asher had paused, his beer halfway to his mouth. Grey skin," I repeated. "Maybe you've got a different word for it. I know the Aboriginal kids called it something else." "What's a grey skin? Is that some kind of disease?" Kelly, Asher's girlfriend, had asked. I started to feel uncomfortable now. This was going to be another one of those things that city people were not familiar with. Like buying your own fruit from a truck or needing to take 20 litres of water in a car with a massive rhubarb on it just to travel to the next town over. This was going to make me sound weird and different from everyone else, and I considered trying to pretend I was just making a joke and changing the subject. Asher was not having that though. "Go on then. What's a grey skin?" I hesitated slightly before admitting to myself that I was never a good liar, and I went on to tell the truth. "Okay, you see, it's like a person, but not really. You might think it was a person from a distance, but you can tell something's off when you get closer. And if it likes the way your skin looks, it takes you away. It likes to take skin that hasn't got sunspots and wrinkles and scars. But it normally won't bother you if you're dirty or you got stuff all over you. That's why you draw on yourself. So if a grey skin comes by, it won't get you." Kelly laughed at this. "It's a bit early in the day for ghost stories, I reckon. That's a pretty good one though. Was that just a local thing?" I was kind of confused now. "Kelly, it isn't a ghost story. It's not like a myth or anything like that. It was just a thing you had to be careful about. Asher and Kelly were looking back at me now like I'd just stripped off and started doing the hokey pokey. Asher spoke first. "Listen, man, I don't mean to be an asshole or anything, but you know that can't possibly be true, right? This isn't something you believe anymore, is it? Is this like a religious thing?" Now it was my turn to give them the naked hokey pokey stare. Because, of course, greyskins are a thing. They're not a pleasant thing, but a widely accepted fact of life. Snakes are scary and dangerous and probably fairly uncommon in the city too, but that does not mean they don't exist. Of course I believe in them. I've seen one. Heaps of people I know have seen one. Asher let out a cough that was an obvious and half-hearted attempt to hide a brief eruption of laughter. "All right then, tell us about the greyskin." So I told them about my first and only proper encounter with a greyskin. I'll recount it here again, because although my friends still don't believe a word of it, they've told me I should share a little of what I had always considered to be a fairly regular childhood, as this encounter, and many others that I've since shared with them, apparently are not normal at all. The town that I grew up in had a population of a bit under 300. Okay, so town might have been a bit too generous of a word. The town centre comprised of a general store, a petrol station, a mechanic, a very small doctor's office, a crumbling and rarely used town hall, a scattering of houses, a pavilion where the weekend markets and an odd rodeo were held, and that was really about all. Spiralling out from the town was a vast ring of farms, and further out, cattle stations the size of small countries. Some of the station staff lived in the town, but most of them stayed out on the properties and rarely ventured beyond their borders. The majority of the town inhabitants were people from the wheat and barley farms, and people who worked in the town itself. Everyone knew one another, and visitors were rare. I spent most of my time kicking around the closest farms with my friends. On hot days, we would ride our bikes down to Chloe Brown's family farm, down to the paddock and down to the biggest dam around. We would strip off and splash around in the cold, muddy water and float around in inner tubes for hours at a time. It was on one of these days that I met the greyskin. The sun was starting to set, and the other kids had headed home after a long day of swimming and throwing dirt clods at each other in the baking 45 degrees Celsius heat. I had wanted to float a little longer. I knew that if I was quick on my bike, I could spend another 10 minutes lounging in the inner tube and still make it home in time before it was dark. I don't know where he or it came from. The paddocks all around me were flat and sparse, so when I caught sight of the shuffling silhouette, I was indeed caught by surprise. I couldn't make it out at first. I thought maybe it was Chloe's dad coming by to check up on me. But as the thing moved out of the direct path of the glaring sunset, it became very clear that this was something else entirely. It was tall, taller than any man I'd seen before. It had no hair, not on its head, not on its body, only papery, stone-coloured skin. It moved quickly, deliberately, not quite running, but taking long and forceful steps, like a power walker. Before I had really made sense of what was happening, it was at the water's edge. My brain was moving as slowly as my body, trudging through the clouded water. I had been floating close to the bank of the dam, and I hesitated before standing up. This thing, it was now less than 4 meters away from me. I, standing with my feet sinking into the muddy earth below me, water up to my ankles, shivering under the darkening sky with only a pair of Ninja Turtle jocks to keep me warm. It, now peering at me with interest, milky eyes staring unblinkingly. Its jaw, it hung slack. A strange noise had started to escape it, somewhere between the sound you make when you clear your throat and the sound of air escaping a gas bottle. The sound, it dragged on and on, rising in volume as the grey skin began to move again. It did not walk forward this time. Instead, it moved in a way that I had seen many times in my short life living in a wild place. The long, gnarled fingers spread out from its palms. It squared its bare and ash-covered feet. Its weight shifted noticeably downward, and its head tilted toward me. Anyone who has ever owned a cat, anyone who has ever seen a fox stalking a sheep, anyone who has watched a cobra mold itself into a tense spring in a nature doco, you would know this stance. It was the anticipatory shape of a predator that was about to attack. My mind, it ran too slowly. I was frozen in place for half a second too long. A breath before my brain finally kicked into gear with run, hide, swim backwards to the center of the dam, you dopey galah. Grab some mud, rub it over your skin. Do something. The grey skin, it was on me. Its long, clawed hands were hooked around my shoulders. This thing, it towered over me, taller by a meter at least. The hanging jaw, it descended down, its ashy neck curling toward me. An audible cracking accompanied the slow and unnatural movements. This thing's hot breath on my face, it smelled terrible, like the abattoir on a hot summer's afternoon. I was frozen. On some primal level, I knew that if I moved an inch, it would kill me. Those long, sharp fingers would dig into my back and tear me in half. Its wide mouth, it would open even wider, and its sharp yellow teeth would rip my throat out. Its long and filthy feet would slice into my bare stomach and pull my intestines out. The grey skin continued to make its creaking, hissing sound. I felt the sensation of its dry hands moving down my shoulders. I felt as it tightened its grip around my left wrist. Its cloudy eyes surveyed my skin as it stooped down further. It brought its hairless grey head so close to my forearm that I felt its horrible, scaly skin graze against my own. Pieces dislodged, fluttering into the wind like flakes of burnt-up paper. I was dead. I knew this. Cold, crippling fear made my stomach clench. I closed my eyes, tensing every muscle against what I knew was to come. The pitchy, crackling gargle from its throat continued on, getting louder and more threatening, echoing in my brain and becoming unbearable. And then suddenly, it stopped. I cautiously opened my eyes. The grey skin was still in front of me. It still held my left wrist in its hand, now high above my head, hot in the late afternoon sun. The light had caught the shiny new skin of a small scar that ran down the inside of my elbow. It was less than a year old, tiny and discreet enough to go unnoticed most of the time. Not now, though. The grey skin's gaze had fixed unwaveringly on the tiny, unassuming patch of pale scar tissue. It gripped my wrist even harder, yanking my arm to examine my inner elbow even more closely. It remained silent for a moment more before letting out a cry. A howl of anger and frustration echoed through the breeze. The clawed hand, it let go of my wrist as if it was toxic waste. I fell back in shock, ass first into the ankle-deep water, the rest of me following soon after. In a moment, I was on my back, in the silt and mud of the dam, looking up at the blue sky above me. Through the bubbles and sediment, I could make out the silhouette of the greyskin standing over my prone body. It looked down at me, still semi-crouching and heaving with rage. I struggled through the sticky, dark mud to try and move away from it, and as I did, more earth moved around me, clouding the water and obscuring my vision completely. I scooted back a little way, probably not far at all, but every centimetre felt like a victory as I wriggled away from this horrifying thing. The mud cleared. The greyskin, it was gone. I sat up in the shallow pool, gasping for air and coughing up dirty-tasting dam water. I looked around, my vision scanning the acres of flat paddocks all around me. I saw nothing. It had disintegrated into the land as quickly as it had appeared. All that was left now were a few grey flakes of the thin, paper bark-like skin. I rode home as fast as I could. I had not bothered to get dressed, and I must have been a sight for anyone who saw me, practically naked and face red and wet with tears. My mum tutted when I got home. I had gotten back after sunset and I'd left my good shorts and my backpack at the dam. I'd of course too tracked water all through the kitchen and made an awful fuss. When I told her about the greyskin, she tutted again, retrieving a permanent marker from the study and drawing a mark on my arm similar to the one that she had drawn on her own. I was lectured on the importance of making sure it didn't wash off when I swam, and I was told that I would be spending my free time tomorrow morning riding back to the dam to get my things. After that, I was very careful to make sure I followed Mum's rules when it came to staying safe. It really was common sense, and I certainly learned the dangers of being careless the hard way. Which is why, even now, so far away from that place, I still take precautions. It may seem a bit silly to do it in a big city, but I'd rather be safe than sorry, and it certainly can't hurt to be cautious. I told as much as I've said here to Asher and Kelly. They, of course, thought it was ridiculous, and maybe you will too. But this was just life for me, where I grew up. And really, grey skins are nothing compared to some of the other things that go hand in hand with living in the outback. I've since told them about some of the other stuff that happened in my town, growing up. They both think I should talk about it here. I don't know how much of that is just for their own entertainment, but I'm happy to share. Maybe someone out there had a childhood just like mine. Maybe they can back me up. And if you haven't, well, this story has just been a drop in a very, very big, Pacific-sized bucket. Maybe it's time for you to see the ocean.